It's been said that in India we don't write good accessible works of history or good historical novels. Well, The Exile is eloquent proof that we do storytelling, and to understand just how remarkable an achievement it is, we need to remember that Dalip Singh is perhaps the most complex and most troubling figures of Indian and Sikh history. His life was manipulated all to his father Ranjit Singh's throne, and then by the British, who took him away from everything that he could call his own heroic figure. But Navtej gives us a brilliantly nuanced story that brings great dignity to exile as it is a geographical exile. And of course the novel is also very rich in 40s. And it is an indictment of imperialism, as also of the intrigue and the incredible violence that followed in Lahore. Using 5 different voices in addition to the lead Singh to tell the story. And each of the 6 voices is fascinating, but my favorite is Mangala Mai, that you can expect to find in a Manto story. She's opinionated, colorful, and full of robust wisdom that comes only.
Yes, look here. Barkha, yes, Navtej ji.
Thank you. Before Navtej starts the meeting and before the conversation begins, okay, can I please request everyone to put
I don't want to keep you away from Barkhaza. I'll do a short introductory reading to a deathbed. He's dying in a small hotel in Paris in the autumn of 1893, and he is alone. Does it matter where one dies, in which country, which land? Does it matter at all if the last breath is drawn among your own people, friends and lovers, or among strangers, or completely alone? If you have not lived at home, perhaps there is no cause to die there. And what is home? Where I was born, or where I lived all my life? Do I call Punjab my home, or England? If I had a choice, where would I want my bones to become dust? And would it matter? I know these things mattered to my mother, BBT. Beautiful Jinda, ruined by the same fate as I. At this hour, I will even admit that perhaps we were both small and inadequate, and the times demanded too much of us. But no, a dying mind wanders. When I met my mother in Calcutta after our separation of 14 years, before she decided to come with me to England, her only wish was to pass her remaining days at some holy place on the banks of the Ganges. She would never have been at peace if I had let her bones lie in England, far away from the land of her ancestors. That is why I had to do what I did, carry her back across the seas. Let the few fistfuls of her burnt-out remains flow into the Godavari. I could not immerse her ashes in the Ganges or the Sutlej, but at least she was in India. I remember how the waters churned the ashes, curled around them, swept them away. And even as I watched, a swift current took hold of them, and soon it all became the same, the water and my mother, only a sheet of twilight silver, vanishing fast. I remember that moment, though I have forgotten much else. My memory is almost gone. This stroke has finished me. I can barely move. Stretching out for that glass of water on the table seems the most difficult of things. And that light, the patch of sky I see from the window, grows fainter by the day. A curtain is being drawn across everything, and I no longer have the will or even the desire to fight. It is true that I am dying. But there are days when if I shut my eyes, strange colors can still rise in my mind. Forgotten words, songs, faces, and the lost caress of the breezes of Lahore. Sometimes, when the light is of a particular shade, especially on late winter afternoons, I see myself in Lahore Fort. I'm standing at one of the arched windows of my mother's Haveli, above a four-quartered garden with its marble fountain and walkways paved with thin bricks. Beyond the cypress trees, I see a marble pavilion, and still beyond, past the wall of the fort, the plain stretches away to the ribbon of water that is the Ravi. Somewhere there, I used to imagine, were all the battles fought between the Sikhs in blazing yellow and the British in red. I can hear the elephants swaying up the broad marble staircase that came up right under the Suman Burj. I was scared the first time I sat in a silver howdah and came up that staircase. I held on tight to the silver railing in front of me. I don't remember who was with me then, not BBG, else I would not have been afraid. And there is the memory of light filtering through the filigree of marble onto the floor of the Haveli, making patterns that I would step on and imagine myself dressed in a gown woven with light. I wondered then how the light came to us from so far away, how the sun rose and set. I'd asked Mangla once, and she had said, "Ask the Angrez, he'll tell you his race controls it all." Or perhaps this never happened. Perhaps it is only a false memory, and I imagine this because the British certainly were to control all my days and nights, all my stars, my life, such as it was. I see my mother's chamber often these days, sometimes even with my eyes open. The mind, I have heard, has a way of helping the body cope with physical suffering, and perhaps that is why I see that chamber so often now. Feel the warmth of my mother's body next to mine, when a thirst rages in my throat or a pain flares up, for no reason, somewhere in this half-wasted body. From the window of BBG's chamber, the tall minarets of Badshah Mosque were clearly visible. When they fought each other for the throne after my father's death, guns were mounted on those minarets and cannonballs flew over Hazuri Bagh and crashed into Akbari Gate. There was so much killing, BBG said, that rivers of blood flowed from the fort to the bazaar below, and the people of Lahore covered their ears with their hands and shut their eyes and lowered their heads and waited on their knees for the nightmare to pass. I have read all there is to read about those days and years after my father's death. I know of the 100 and more treaties, letters, memoranda, and my mother told me of everything that I lost before I could understand what was mine by right. Some people who saw it all happen are still alive, like Mangla Mai. I haven't seen her for so many years, but Arur tells me she is alive in an ashram on the banks of the Ganges near Hardwar. She will remember everything. Her memory was astonishing. She will understand my wish to die at different deaths, and also my other wish, to sleep, to forget, to be done with it. Or perhaps even she won't. Nobody will understand why I'm dying like this, alone, in this small hotel room, in a beautiful but strange city, from where I can see only the edge of a narrow cobbled street below and a thin strip of sky. The buildings across the street seem close enough to touch. Why am I here, denied all the wide open spaces of my life? The wheat fields that stretched away into the distance below Lahore Fort, the rolling countryside of Elvedon. Nobody will know how I fought, for I did, however imperfectly, and how I was defeated. Thank you.
Conversation going, if at any point any of you feel there's something you'd like to sort of come in with a comment and observation to those of you who read, please just. Now, one of the things that struck me when I was reading the book all of last night.
But you must remember that here the protagonist was a given.
He was a real person.
He was a real person. And one of the guidelines that I laid out myself was that I'm going to write about him, but I'm not going to willingly or knowingly distort any historical fact, either of events or of his character or of what he underwent. So that was a given, and I'm afraid, yes, it's a sad book, it's a sad story, it's not entirely devoid of courage and hope, hope that was frustrated. But certainly it is a story which is inherently filled with sadness.
Why did his story speak to you so much? I mean, why, for example, would you not have fictionalized his father's story instead, which is a more splendid story? Was there something about the anonymity in which he died and how history has always viewed Pradeep Singh that spoke to you?
Well, you know, his father's story was a story of victory. He's a conqueror. He's an unchallenged Maharaja of Punjab. Even the British could not look with ambition across the Satluj while he was alive. So yes, there is a lot of drama there. But I think Dalip Singh's story is a story which has a lot of pathos, which has a lot of, it is more nuanced in that sense. And also it's not being done. So I think the temptation for a novelist is much more to attempt a story of that nature.
The passage you read is set in 1893, but in some ways it could even be true of somebody you knew today. I mean, one of the more interesting things to me in the book was that you seem to know this person. You know, I mean, and so the lines between fact and fiction, imagined history and archival history, as it were, are completely blurred. So when you sat down, obviously you say in your opening prologue that you're truthful to facts, you did rigorous research for this, but in a way, is he also the Dalip Singh of your imagination? Because history is also sometimes imagined. We read history in the way we see that.
I see, that is why I'm careful to say that this is a novel. This is a novel based on history. It's not a history textbook, nor is it a historical biography. So yes, there is an element of imagination. Yeah, but there is an element of imagination of his mood. There is an element of imagination of what he thought was
Loneliness.
of his loneliness. But you know, having said that, I must say that this imagination has also been kept within the parameters of the probable. You know, I have not taken him and sort of pushed him completely wild in one direction or the other. But I've tried to, if you read all his letters, if you read his declarations, his memoranda, his proclamations, you get a very clear view of what he was thinking. So from there, it is only a short leap to saying that yes, he was thinking this, but now how do I change his thoughts into more emotive expression? How do I change them into conversations? How do I change them into feelings?
And is that why you chose to write a work of fiction instead of an art of history?
Most definitely. I mean, history, you see, history is a very stringent, strenuous, demanding discipline. History, I mean, any historian who writes a certain fact checks it every possible way. But by its very nature, it's not the kind of subject in which blood flows, you know, and you don't feel it living. So if you're going to round up the personality, which was the attempt in this case, and you're going to round it up into a weak, strong, irresolute, you know, any sort of person, then you have to go beyond. You have to go into his mind. You have to go into his heart. You have to go into what he could have thought, what people around him must have felt. You have to go into jealousies, anger, bitterness. This is not history. So I had to move, and since I felt that whatever has been written by him or about him in history was highly
Unfair.
I'd say highly inadequate. Highly inadequate. It tells us, yes, he was there, he was taken away, he went, he lived his life there, he tried to come back, went off to Russia, you know. And then either it is inadequate or it is patronizing. All sorts of, you know, he's projected as a buffoon, he's projected as a bumbling idiot walking around the chancelleries of Europe, 19th century Europe, neck deep in conspiracies which he did not understand. But when you actually read, for instance, what he's written himself, and so you take his private letters and read, and they're not the letters. They're not the letters of an unintelligent man. They are the letters of somebody who feels. They are the letters of somebody who knows what he's lost. They are the letters of somebody who attempts. Yes, suddenly, but he's also the kind of man who can go from saying, oh, I want to go back to India, I want to give up everything, I want to go, and then he says, but next year there's great hunting in such and such place, so I must do some hunting. So,
But
he is
dichotomous.
dichotomous, he is imperfect, he is certainly a person who's probably the events of his youth, the events of his childhood, left a very deep impact on his personality.
But tragic heroes are usually, or is it like we all lose and therefore he speaks to us?
That is a danger. That is a danger. I mean, it's a very common perception, and it's been said to me by people who looked at the manuscript at certain stages or heard the story, that who wants to listen to a story about somebody who's a complete loser? So that was a challenge. That was a fear. Because my first novel also, people said, oh, it's all a story about a loser. So we didn't want to sort of get stereotyped that I only write about losers. But I still...
Well, it's a lament, and that was common to your first book and your second. They're very different books, but there is this... the face we never saw is JSXP, the soulful, soft, lamenting Nafis Sada, as opposed to the formal, very proper diplomat, which I would
I don't know why you didn't see it as JSXP, given the kind of questions you asked. I was feeling very soulful when... No, but that is true. There is a sense of lament, there is a sense of loss, there is a sense of nostalgia, but there is also a sense of rebellion. There's also a sense of couldn't care less for anything in the end. He kicks away everything and walks off.
He's non-conformist. Although being placed in such a, palace, traditionalist context.
He basically, in the end, in the last 10 years of his life, he found somewhere the courage to stand up for something and say that, no, I've had enough, for whatever reason. To be fair enough to say that the reason was perhaps not a tremendous conviction, perhaps it was the fact that, he wasn't given a just treatment under the treaties. He didn't even get the money that he was supposed to get. So, for whatever reason, he had a realization that he had lost a huge deal, and there was nothing for him left, and so he kicked off everything. He said, I don't want the pension given by the British government, and he left England for good.
And you dedicate the book to all those who have died in exile. That's what the book is called. And in some ways, reading the setting in Lahore, because so much of it is set in Lahore, what struck me was it is actually a parallel strand there for many Sikhs certainly, who home was once Lahore. Not just back then, but even in partition. In some ways, there is a whole exile that has taken place from Lahore to let's say this part of India and reverse journey. And there is such a love for Lahore, and that comes through. It's almost as you can imagine it, you can see it, you can smell it, you feel you know Lahore intimately. Where did that come from? Was that part of your personal experience, or was that how you imagined his experience?
No, I don't have a personal experience of Lahore. Yes, from a generation of my parents, we have heard a lot of nostalgia about Lahore, about life in Lahore, about the water of Lahore, about the breeze of Lahore. Everything about Lahore is fantastic. But personally I did not have any such experience. But here it was, I think it was that probably melted into the telling of the story.
But when you were writing it, you did actually go to Lahore and walk about character, in a sense, to get into the...
I think that was essential. Without that, you couldn't get a feel for... you had to stand in the Lahore fort and actually figure out what are the history books talking about when they talk of Suman Gulch, or when they talk of the Ravi stretching out there, or how the elephants come up the the slope of the fort. I mean, you can't feel it unless you've actually sort of walked around there and seen the distances, seen the layout of the forts, etc. So that is extremely essential, at least for my sort of writing.
Oh, at one point in the book,
Know his father, in the sense that Ranjit Singh died when he was about 2 years old. So he didn't, in any actual fact, in terms how the empire of Ranjit Singh, which stretched from Satluj to the Khyber, within a space of 10 years, crumbled, and that, what sort of a character am I? I mean, my father would not have done this. My father would, I can't really be a true son of his father. Added to the fact that there are doubts about it, he saw very closely how she acted during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, how she...
questions.
With the caged lions outside the Sherambala Darwaza. Thieves and bandits, beggars and merchants, women of high virtue and low. The Lionheart city was home to them all. They could make their fortune here or lose it. The splendor of Lahore Arur, it is